Friends, and welcome. Tonight's speaker, Tara Houska, Kutchiching First Nation Anishinaabe, is a tribal attorney, founder of the Guinea Collective, and a former advisor of Native American Affairs to Bernie Sanders. She spent 6 months on the front lines fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline and is currently engaged in the movement to defend defund fossil fuels and a years-long struggle against Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline. She is the co-founder of Not Your Mascots, a group committed to positive representation of Native peoples. She is a tent speaker. The 2017 Harvard Public Interested Keynote received an Awesome Women's Award from Melinda Gates, and in 2019, Rachel's Network Catalyst Award, and is featured in Women, A Century of Change by National Geographic. Tara has written for the women-led climate anthology, All We Can Save, the New York Times, The Guardian, Vogue, and Indian Country Today. She lives in a pipeline resistance camp in northern Minnesota, currently under siege. All that being said, it is my honor to welcome Tara from the front lines of the Indigenous justice, treaty, and land rights actions of Line 3. Please welcome this fiercely present and powerful human being tonight. May we hold and carry on her message and witness on behalf of us all.
Buju Ginawa, Shabawe Kwe Indigenous, Makwa and Dudim, Gojing and Dunchaba, Hello everyone. My name is Tara Houska. I am Bear Clan from Kutchiching First Nation, and I was born under the boiling moon. I'm very honored to be here with all of you today, or this evening, I guess, and greet you all with an open heart and mutual respect for people of faith. So I'm calling in from the front lines of the Line 3 fight. We're about 200 yards off the proposed Line 3 route. I ducked inside one of the structures actually to avoid all the flies that are biting right now. It's that time of the year, that magical time of the year here in northern Minnesota. It's also a time of the year where we're seeing things that we've never seen before. The heat dome, as they're calling it, or all these ways of looking at what is happening, which is climate crisis manifesting in the Pacific Northwest, where dozens of people have died in the last week from overheating and from the ravages of humankind making terrible decisions. To the western seaboard being on fire, to what's happening here in northern Minnesota, which is the lakes and rivers are 5 feet low. They are drought stricken. The earth is like dust, and we're under fire advisories, which is, I've never seen something quite like this in my life. And neither my parents or my grandparents. And while all that is happening, we are at the Canoe Collective and others are at the forefront of using our bodies and our freedom to try to stop the expansion of the fossil fuel industry as it's happening, as it's unfolding before us. All along those rivers and lakes and dried out wild rice beds and streams. Enbridge, the company behind Line 3, has pump trucks pumping out the water from the rivers, from the lakes, to use for drilling mud, to drill under 22 rivers, 800 wetlands, and 200 bodies of water. The project is a massive tar sands project out of Alberta. It's one of 2 currently proposed, this and Trans Mountain Pipeline. where people are fighting on the front lines of that. Indigenous peoples are leading that fight also. And so it's been hard over the last few weeks to walk on the banks of a lake that is no more, that is now just a field. I've never seen anything quite like that in my life. And to see hoses on the sides from the trucks pumping out the water, and to hear the calls of the kingfishers and the sandpipers and the many animals who have been displaced is so heartbreaking. It's hard to really wrap my mind around. And to know that they're using that water to expand the fossil fuel industry is that much more painful. It's like seeing human beings destroying ourselves in real time, and feeling the enormous pain of the ecosystems around us while that's happening, and bearing witness to the unnatural, the destruction of life in front of us. There's also a lot of beauty. I've been privileged to bear witness to hundreds and hundreds of young people and people from all walks of life, really, including Quakers, who have come out to risk themselves and to engage in self-sacrifice for something more than any one of us. To look at the face of a fossil fuel baron and the money and so-called power behind it, and to still take a stand, and to do that with love and compassion and care, and to watch that empowerment happen, of feeling like I was confronted with, what do I do? How do I help? How do you stop a problem that's so massive? How do you right the ship? And so many of us have done the petitions and the marches and the rallies, and called our representatives and called everyone we can, and engaged in the legal system. Here in the Line 3 fight, we submitted 68,000 comments against the Line 3 project. 94% of the comments were opposed to this project, yet it was a unanimous approval. And so when you're faced with that and you look at, I've done all these things, what more can I do? And then you watch a person directly blockade and stop construction for a day, and you watch that beautiful gift that they've given of resistance compound with the other people taking those risks, and it becomes a louder drumbeat, and it starts to reach the ears of people who don't want to listen but are then forced to. We have had over 500 arrests here in this campaign since November. To put that in context, there were 800 arrests at Standing Rock, and we did that without 10,000 people. We did that without the attention of the world. We did that with heart and love during a pandemic and during a cold winter. I have been forever changed seeing 20-year-olds climbing into tar sands pipes in 0-degree temperatures. It's such a beautiful, powerful thing to witness a human being taking such an act of love and doing that so selflessly, and knowing that we will face the state after that, but doing it anyway. It is an extension of the fight that's happening for the sacred all over Mother Earth. There are little groups of people who are doing exactly this work, that are on the front lines of land defense. And it's oftentimes Indigenous people who are leading these fights, because we are the holders of these last sacred places. We're only 5% of the global population, holding 80% of its remaining biodiversity. We are living in connection with nature still, despite colonization and despite the efforts to eradicate those ways of knowing and those ways of being, which is looking at a river and seeing a living being, walking through the forest and understanding that we are walking with living beings that have seen generations come and go. In my own spiritual growth, our people fast on islands, and we're surrounded by water. And every time I'm out on that island and looking across the lake and praying for my family, my friends, the earth, our people, all people, I'm always struck by thinking of how many have prayed in that spot before me, how many feet have touched those stones, how many hands have brushed the water and thought about the sacred, and what I'm going to do individually to protect that and make sure I can pass it to the next link in the chain. That's a way of looking at the world that has unfortunately fallen out of so many hearts and instead has been replaced with consumerism and a hollow form of culture, which isn't really culture at all and seems to leave people unfulfilled and upset and grasping at something that has been lost and taken from them. All of us are inherently connected to nature. We are nature. We are the earth. We are the water. We are our mother. We are the stars. It's just that some of us have forgotten that. I spend a lot of my time actually, or at least a portion of it, engaging with the financial institutions behind these projects and bringing forward the lawsuits and the regulatory reviews and the checks that their own clients are supposed to be doing, but they don't. And there's always a moment where I remind the person sitting across from me wearing the 3-piece suit usually that they are surrounded by the earth all of the time, that the concrete walls are manipulated stone, that the glass is manipulated sand, that they're wearing cotton and fibers from the earth, and that they themselves are of the earth. And sometimes I watch a banker kind of like look at themselves like, oh wow. Like there's a moment of reaching them and seeing them feel just a little bit uncomfortable and like think for a second, and then they try to be like, it's too much. It's too much. I'm going to go back to my numbers and figures. I've seen that happen in real time, and it's been eye-opening, I think, to see the humanity that still exists in all of us. And to understand also that I think our movement to protect the earth that so many have joined, they have at least ingested that climate change is happening, whether or not from the efforts of the environmental movement or just from looking at their back door and seeing the ravages of climate crisis. So many of us have realized this is happening and we need to change. We have to do something about it. And then seeing that spark happen, but I think there's still this really strong urge to keep ourselves separate still, to talk about 1.5 degrees and to separate ourselves from what is really happening. We are so accustomed to the language of statistical analysis, of a distancing that happens between ourselves and our mother, a belief that it's a outside problem to be solved without recognizing that our own bodies are reacting and changing with that problem, that we are also experiencing the ravages of climate crisis, even if we're not in the global south, that the way that we have, at least in this particular society, chosen to consume food on a mass scale, to consume water on a mass scale, thinking about purchasing the sacred, I mean, all the time, right? Like that's just like it's something that so many don't really think of, but some of us, I mean, I see that in the commodification of the sacred is just another example of how far we've moved away from ourselves as human beings, as holders of those basic truths. When I'm sitting on an island praying and suffering and not drinking water for 4 days, I am actualizing the knowledge that all of us hold, which is none of us can live without water. None of us can live without clean air to breathe and clean soil to grow food. Those truths are absolute and they are not separate from us. They are reality. When I was asked to give this talk and I was thinking about a title, and Indigenous wisdom came to mind. I think that Indigenous wisdom, at least the pieces that are ones we can share, that at least I can share, are values. And they're not values specific to one culture, the values that are held as human beings of empathy and humility and respect and love. You know, those are values that would, if actualized in everyday practice, create that better world that so many of us are fighting for. You know, I help guide these folks into resistance and into pulling levers to try to push change. But at the foundation of it is a very clear intent to reestablish that connective tissue between ourselves and our mother. We spend a lot of time growing food together and tapping trees for syrup together, knocking wild rice to in canoes to eat together, hunting and fishing, and understanding that relationship of taking a life if you choose to eat the flesh of another being, what that actually feels like. It's not an easy thing to do. And to hold that knowledge and to internalize it is to, I think, shift the path, you know, of each person that goes through that. Myself, in this time that I've been here in this space, I've learned so much. I've learned that I didn't know the winter quite as well as I thought I did. That it is very difficult to live outside when it's 40 below zero. That it is hard to stay alive. And that my ancestors are, I mean, the strength of those folks. They don't have grocery stores, you know. I can at least get out, you know, and have a plow truck or whatever, and like can move around. But to be able to survive that, I understand why we count our age in winters now, all the way through. I definitely get it. I hope that we as human beings can come together in a way that begins to reflect some of those values of basic truths. I hope that we, as a climate movement, begin to look at a more balanced way of engaging. We expend so much energy into comfortable ways of advocacy. The passive click on a petition, the willingness to go stand somewhere together and then leave, the hope that if enough of us call, the right decision will be made. All of those things are important. That's what a balanced way of being is. But what I see is the voice of our mother and the fight for her that's happening being held by so few. This work is dangerous. This work is exhausting. This work is powerful and beautiful and humbling. You know, I think to be humbled in this way is a gift. It's a reminder of how small each flicker of light inside of us is. But the power of those flickers coming together and forming a flame and lighting a way forward. It's been such an honor, and it still continues to be, to spend and be in community with people who do such selfless acts and stand together so powerfully and do that so fearlessly sometimes, but sometimes with fear too. Fear is also beautiful. It's okay to be afraid. It's just about taking that step forward. I was asked the other day about what do I think bravery is? And the best answer I could give was that to me, it's the feeling of fear, of uncertainty, and that tightness, and, you know, the quick breath and that heightened sense of being, and then taking a step forward anyway. That's brave. That's brave to do. And it's brave to step past that block within ourselves of our limits. It was really one of the most powerful, I guess, I don't know if I call it one of the most beautiful direct actions I've seen in this campaign was with the Quakers, actually. It was the first time that any of us had ever done a piano blockade. So picture a fueling pump station, and it's like 0 outside, and these amazing people playing music together, chained to a piano and blockading a gate and stopping work for that day and dancing and singing together. It was so powerful to see. And as a person of faith, it just touched me so deeply. And it's something that I will carry in my heart for as long as I live, to see those happy smiles and the breath of people in the air as they were singing. It was a moment for sure. So let's see, what are we at? I usually don't like to talk for the whole time. I always actually really like to hear what people have to say. So I appreciate the time and the space and the welcome to being with all of you over Zoom. Maybe at some point we actually get to actually be in person together. That's a little different, right? It brings a connective tissue with each other. But miigwech for the time and for the space, and would love to hear from all of you.
Aku Mepchumawi.
Hello.
Halito Sahachefa Yoko Kolusa.
Ani Ishwaje Nini Indigenous.
At first, I just want to honor the ancestors and the spirit of this land. This land has always been, is, and it will continually be Anishinaabe and Dakota territories.
We're in a Wampanoag right now. That's what we're sitting in together. This space is for sweat, it's for ceremony, it's for teaching, it's for so many different, it's for living. I think it's deeply powerful to be in this sacred space in the midst of all of this.
I'm here today standing with my Indigenous kin. It's just shocking to me that we're doing something that is absolutely natural and traditional for this community, and it has been criminalized.
I'm here standing in the way of the Line 3 tar sands pipeline with my Indigenous neighbors. Christians have been a part of the cultural genocide. So I'm here today as a part of the season of Lent as a Christian to follow Jesus and repent and turn around, stand in the way of this madness.
As an Odawa Anishinaabe, I see it as my duty to come here and support my Ojibwe relatives. I'm also here to stand for the Minoman, and I see this as my duty to the future generations, so that they can see these waters untouched by Enbridge and untouched by oil spills.
We support these people, we support their lifeways, and absolutely we must stop Line 3.
I come here by way of Lenapehoking, so-called New York City, the epicenter of global capitalism, and I'm here in solidarity with my Indigenous and Black kin to remind folks that you're on fucking Indigenous land. And I'm not here to placate white settler politics that constantly disappoint. So this is a call that you're either with us or you're not.
It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to wake up this morning, pray for the land, pray for the water. I want to give a big shout out to other land defenders, the people in Yellowfinch, the Apache people in Oak Flat, the Mapuche Nation of Southern Chile protecting their homelands, all indigenous nations and tribes in the jungle, protecting their water, protecting their traditions and culture and way of life, fighting against the same corporations. What happening here in the north is happening also in the south, and our struggles are interconnected.
We are in a moment right now. One path is gonna lead to death and one path leads to life. And I'm here today because I choose life.
I'm here taking these risks because it's time to do something different. And we're not gonna get that done comfortably or easily. Somebody has to take a stand. None of us are sacrifice zones, and it's time for change. We said no, and we're still saying no.
All right, if anyone has questions, I appreciate it.
Now we're ready for question and answers. As you heard, Tara wants to hear questions in your voice, your questions, concerns. So in order to streamline this process, we have a couple of requests. Please use your Zoom raise a hand function. If you have any questions, any problems with that, you could message the tech support person. Walter and I will be calling on people in the order we see your hands raised for the most part, but we will shift it around in order to hear from people of different identifiers also, such as race and age and gender identity. Be sure your question is clear, concise, on topic, and keep it short so others can speak. We all would like to have a word with Tara. This has been powerful to have you with us. So let's settle for a moment. In the meantime, Tara, there are a couple things in chat that you might consider just as people are getting their, lots of hands raised already. But the question that to start with perhaps are, could you repeat the location of where the lake had disappeared and tell us more about the camp where you're staying to get us started, and then I'll call on people.
Sure. The lake that I was at the other week is Lower Rice Lake. It's on the White Earth Reservation. It's one of the biggest wild rice beds in this region. And it was, I'll be thinking about that lake for a long time. I mean, probably the rest of my life. It's one of the saddest things I've ever experienced in nature. And that lake is not alone. They are pumping out our rivers all over northern Minnesota right now. Originally, Enbridge thought that it would de-water, which is like when it encounters water for the pipeline, it pumps it out and then it puts it back in days later. Originally, it thought it would be doing that to 540 million gallons of water. Then it started in the territory and it adjusted last week its amount to 5 billion gallons of water. And there is no plan as to how they're going to get that water back into the ecosystem without destroying the ecosystem. I mean, we're talking about 800 wetlands. If you've ever been in northern Minnesota, this is where the Mississippi River starts. This is where there are so many rivers and tributaries and rich, beautiful ecosystems that still exist. And that's what they're looking at, irrevocably harming just with the construction of the line beyond the spills. I mean, once the spills start, as they inevitably do, the damage will be felt by us and those to come. The camp that I'm calling from is called Nemewug Camp. Nemewug is the sturgeon. So in my ways of knowing, the sturgeon carry all the other clans on their back. And so if you don't have a clan or you don't know your clan, you are a sturgeon clan. So it was meant to be a welcoming space to anyone who wants to come and stand strong for the land, for the water. It's been in existence since June of 2018 when they approved the Line 3 project. We opened the space by blessings of matriarchs from Standing Rock, LaDonna Allard, from Hawaii, Pua Case, from here in this territory, many women, including myself. And the first structure that was built here was our sweat lodge. It's a place that has been largely led by Femme and Two-Spirit folks in an attempt to balance out the toxic patriarchy that has also ravaged so much of our decision making and the imbalance that exists in the world. We're about 200 yards off the proposed Line 3 route, and it's being constructed everywhere in northern Minnesota right now. There are 5,000 workers here in this rural place, most of whom are out of state. The danger is quite high. I've almost been run off the road. I've had my windshield smashed. Actually, after that beautiful action with the Quakers, some folks came in and smashed my windshield on the way out. And there was actually a second sex trafficking ring of Enbridge employees that was busted earlier this week. the risks that are associated with these types of projects are not just to the earth, they're also to its people. Somebody has to deal with that many people in the territory. They form man camps and they rent apartments and Airbnbs and hotels, and they are everywhere. And they are doing the unnatural. And I think that leads people to a state of, I mean, when you're committing violence on the earth, that violence is then enacted on its people.
Thank you. Let's go to Eileen Flanagan. Please unmute yourself and talk to Tara.
Thank you so much for your words and your wisdom. I'm coming to Minnesota in a little over a week, so I hope I get to meet you in person, although I'm starting at a different camp. I'm wondering, what can you share about what you've learned about staying grounded in your spirituality when somebody smashes your windshield, or when you watch this heartbreaking thing of the lake being drained? We had a discussion earlier of Quakers who have been already and some who are thinking of coming. And I'm wondering in particular what wisdom you have to share about that grounding. Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes it hurts so much, right? To see people being so hurtful to each other.
I was crying just listening to you, so I'm that's part of where the question.
I mean, earlier this week, we had a riot line of police that showed up at our camp and blockaded us in, trying to prevent us from going to, I believe, the Mississippi River, because they finished the Mississippi River crossing next to the Welcome Water Protector Center earlier this week. The same day, actually, was the last day of its drilling. It can be hard, right? And you're watching these folks slamming your friends to the ground and saying awful things to you, treating you like less than a person. And I think for me personally, the way that I see it is, there is upset that happens. Obviously, I'm a person. But I try really, really hard to think of the island, to think of the sacred, to think of the pitiful nature of human beings that we have, our tendency towards ego and greed and defensiveness and attention and all the things that make us human, right? And maybe not always in the moment, but certainly when I have time to process what's happened, I think that those people are just like me. They're pitiful, and they're in their own path and they're in their own way. I also make a concerted effort to spend a lot of time with the water and to let it go there. It's really hard when you're listening to a giant machine ripping apart the earth. And for me, it's even harder to see, groups of people that are, in my assessment, not doing anything about it, right? Like they're just standing there, or they're not even paying attention. And I don't understand that, but when I spend time with the water, I can forgive and not necessarily forget, but at least try to find my way back to those internal core values and beliefs.
Thank you. And we have a screen that says Yumi Kalani, and then something else I can't read. Please identify yourself and unmute.
Yeah. Hi, aloha. This is Yumi Kwano calling you from Volcano, Hawaii. This is my husband Kalani.
Here's you.
And you and Yama. Yama, that's Yama. How's it? And we so appreciate you speaking to the Quakers about what's going on over there. And we have the same sadness going on here, sadness of ripping grounds, and we restore rainforests, we get funding from Natural Resource Conservation Service, and we basically make it better because we got some of the last native rainforests, and so we make it better and put back native plants by taking out invasive species, which poison the ground, which keep the natives from coming back. And there's an analogy, isn't there? The white people got to get out of the way, and they got to just lift us, the people of color, and especially the indigenous folks that my husband says are extinct species. Hawaiians are integrated here in some ways, maybe worse off. I don't know, because some of them are having a hard time retaining their values and such, but there's been a great resurgence since the 70s. But anyhow, I don't want to keep talking, but my question to you is that I believe they need great legal guidance, some guidance, and I don't know where we can find that. If you have anything, I'll put in the chat our email, just telling it like it is at mail.com. And if you could advise us, point us in the right direction, I think that would really help. Mauna Kea I think we're getting ready to protest here about Governor Ige is going to start taking Hawaiian lands, crown lands, and start developing. And I ran against him last year as mayor. And so I knew he was going to do something like that. He got paid big bucks to, and that's why he won, I think. But anyhow, that's my big question. And I just want to build alliances of all the Native people, if possible, and people of color, and Elvis, and all these wonderful Quakers too. And there's so many wonderful people that want to help. So I believe this is going to be one of the greatest movements because it's all about earth care, which is, and that's going to meld us all together, which is probably which you're already the example of, just care of the earth. Who cares what our races are? We just care about the earth, right? So that's kind of my biggest question. And then how we build alliances, just let me know if I can help. We spoke with a Native lady, and so we're going to get in touch with her. I think she's Anaconda. Her name is Frida. So yeah. So anybody else have a question?
I guess so. I would say is that I heard you say that the police were kind of maybe slamming you guys down to the ground and saying some awful things. And I guess what that shows is that the Native American culture on the mainland is not as strong as over here. And that's not an insult, that's just a fact. The thing that is prevalent is that the Hawaiian culture here and the cultural practices are still prevalent. So I'm not even Hawaiian, but I dance hula. And that's just because when you grow up in Hawaii as a kid, you start to adapt these cultural practices that are still alive, even though they've kind of died down. So I guess what I'm kind of relating that to is when I was up on Mauna Kea and we were protesting the building of the TMT telescope, they get 9 telescopes they want to build, they want to add one more and not fix the other ones. Is even when the police would arrest the kopunas, which is the elders, they did so with respect and dignity, because they still, even though they may not agree with the TMT or the TMT protesters, they still have the cultural values of respect and honor and treating your elders with respect and just people. But I think maybe if you guys could find a way to it's you guys are kind of fighting bigger numbers to try to disseminate maybe your cultural values and what's important. And if there'd be a way to kind of maybe teach Western civilization more about your roots and where you come from, then it would help bridge the gap. But here it's we don't have as much.
Yeah, but
we all kind of live under the same roof.
Yeah, but plus we're on an island and a lot of the cops are related.
Yep,
we're all related over here, so you don't want to mess up.
I don't really think that
it's we can't compare.
I definitely don't think that Native culture is any less than any other indigenous culture. I think the reality is
that the cops are a bunch of mostly white folks,
Right.
mostly white men.
On the mainland, yeah,
Have
but here we
no
have mostly
respect.
brown people here on the cops, mostly people from
Right.
Hawaii.
I
Different.
mean,
No,
saw the video of the cutting apart our lodge. They have no respect.
No
when
respect.
when we're on the reservation, it's a completely different thing. Like the tribal police are a lot different, right? Like they're
Mhm.
one, they're related to us, and two,
That's right.
mhm.
It's
they
kind of like
know-
the same here. Yeah.
mess with elders, you can't mess with women. Like it's not an appropriate
Right.
thing to do. And they also feel uncomfortable because they know what we're doing, right? Like they know that we're protecting the land, they know that we're protecting the water, and that creates a lot of I think discord inside, right? Because it's like my job is now telling me that I'm supposed to protect this pipeline or I'm supposed to protect the telescope, but my values and my teachings and my lodge is saying something completely different, you know? Like, how do I grapple with that? How do I find my way through? And I think that's like with your question about the legal system too, like, I mean, I'm a trained lawyer in like US federal Indian law, and to me, it's largely a study of what is the methods and means of dispossessing people of power. You know, it's not been a system that empowers people, any people, not just our
Right.
people, but all kinds of people. Like it
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it pulls power away from the people and gives it to, or at least reserves it to just a few oftentimes.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to build alliances and to engage in all those legal mechanisms for sure, because you never know. Like right now, there's some folks out that are looking for, you know, we've got this one river called the Fell River, and there's like these really, really ancient clams that are in it. And we're wondering if the clams are going to save the day. You know what I mean? Like maybe the clams.
Yeah.
The endangered species or something like that. Or like maybe, you know, if we can go after the DNR permitting a massive amount of water they're taking during a drought, maybe that's the way to at least hold these guys up while they're from destroying sacred in real time as we're putting everything on the line with our bodies. I mean, I would recommend reaching out to Earth Justice and to Earth Rights. Those are both great organizations that do a lot of work in environmental protection, and they're becoming more adept at dealing with specifically native and tribal cultural resources, which also I know is like a little more complicated in Hawaii because of the federal recognition, kind of like, you know, back and forth that's been for so long.
Yeah.
But I know there are cultural protections and so those are two orgs that come to mind in terms of building alliances.
Okay, Earth Justice and Earth Right.
Earth Rights.
Right, Earth Rights. Okay. I think okay, that sounds great. And maybe Just Transitions. I know them too. And,
Thank you for
honey?
calling in from Hawaii, and please put your email in our chat. Perhaps our Quaker Earth Care Witness would like to be in touch with you or some others.
Yes, I am a Quaker Earth Care Witness.
Cool.
Pacific Healing Meeting. Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you so much. Aloha. So next I see three people sitting on a sofa, Susan, JVB, and somebody else. Who would like to speak from that household?
Hi, Betty. This is Minga.
Hi.
Hi. I want to give so many thanks to Tara. You spoke with such grace. I loved the.
You just muted. Unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to give so much thanks, and how special it is that you've spoken directly from your heart, like an arrow of love that has been sent out here. I think I appreciate the being with you, and you probably remember Grandma Rima and I, who joined you for the GNU Collective mobilization that happened in June. And I want to ask, how else can we support, and how would you want Quakers to become allies, maybe even collaborators with you. It's so easy for me and other of my white brothers and sisters to take over or to monopolize or to draw attention. And I want so much to work hand in hand, and somewhat that's my question. I have to say, Tara, when I was at the collective, one of the most amazing person I met was Grumble, and and Grumble. When I asked Grumble, I said, if you had a wish, what would you want for the GNU Collective? And he said, I'd like more people to show up, especially in the cold months.
No, that's totally, I mean, that's like the first ask, right? Which is, we need people, right? Like most of us here have multiple charges in multiple counties, and we're still fighting, right? And we're doing things like the disruption of a pump station, or the empowering of people to learn how to be trained to stand in front of a fence, right? Or something like that, right? But those like little actions all add up to a national issue being made, to the Biden administration being forced to say something because they haven't said anything, right? Like they basically just said, okay, well, Department of Justice is going to defend the Army Corps under Trump. And so that's it, you know, like the White House declines to comment on this project, and that is not acceptable, right? Like if we can create a pressure point, we have to do it. And that's what we have been doing. And we've been doing that consistently for so long, but it is tiring work. And so the folks that can help with that, you know, even if it's not being arrested, even if it's people that are coming out and helping, I'm going to help cook, right? I'm going to help Grumble cook for a week or something like that. Or I'm going to come out and I'm going to haul water, you know, or drive a truck and pick up groceries, or, you know, all those things that need to be done. Or I'm going to come and weed for a week, right? Like the garden is like tons of work also.
Right.
Those pieces are really important. And they're also like, I think one of the more beautiful parts of camp that we don't get to show, which is not the direct actions, and it's not out when we're confronting police, but it's the beauty of building a community, right? Like a community that's inclusive and loving and caring and is Indigenous led, right? Like you talked about, how do we not take over? I think that, at least from what I've seen, the collective has been able to kind of really keep a clear, open understanding that this is an Indigenous led space, even if we are few, you know, I mean, we're not that few, but like colonization has been pretty serious, right? And we still are usually outnumbered by non-native folks. But it's really important to have people who focus on those pieces of building community, and who are leveraging their own gifts that they have to support. I do definitely always appreciate opening up a message, and it's not a death threat or some crazy thing, but it's a prayer, you know, and it's something that someone has sent and said, you know, you really touched my heart, and me and my family are praying for you all out there, you know, and like that means a lot when you're coming in at the end of a really hard day.
Right.
To not see ugliness, but to see something beautiful. Or we just had like the exact opposite, I think, effect of what the Hubbard County Sheriff intended, which was he blocks us into our driveway, which is messed up on so many levels. As a Native person who's actually from this territory, who bought private property in the territory, being blockaded in by a riot line in my driveway is offensive at a minimum, right? Like it's very offensive. And then to see all those people arrested and hurt so badly, so disrespectful. But then we're out in the community, and it's been really a kind of a strange week. Like these people have been coming up to us who've never spoken to us and saying things like, hey, are you guys those water protectors? What they're doing to you is really messed up. Like we're actually not really against the pipeline, but that's so not okay. We've had people offering us like, one person is a masseuse, and so she was like, if you ever need body work, I'll help you. Another person was in the grocery store and just kind of like, that's really messed up. The sheriff needs to get kicked off his job. You know what I mean? And I was like, hell yeah, like somebody cares. Somebody sees how messed up it is, because private property is kind of like the American ideal, right? Like that's like what the notion that was created of drawing lines or whatever. But yeah, I think there are definitely ways to support. And then there's also, I guess, for the broader diversified kind of like distributed campaigning, there is a defund Line 3 campaign. You can learn more about that on stopthemoneypipeline.com. And there are a couple credit facilities coming up in July that might as well hammer them as hard as we can and get them canceled. And of course, target the Biden administration. Email him, call him, tag him, tweet him, all the things. Mobilize faith leaders to push on him. That's the guy.
So there's something for everybody, and we're going to send you prayers too. Tara, we got about 10 minutes left and 3 more questions at least. So would you like me to have each person ask their question and then you wrap it up, or would you like each question separately?
However you want to do it.
All right. So Roxanne, is that how to pronounce it? Let's hear you ask your question, and then I'm going to have Barbara Jo and then Ruth ask their questions, and Lynn too. Be very brief. And then we'll have Tara respond to all of you in her wrap up, in her final 5 minutes as she wraps up. Okay. So be brief, Roxanne. Roxanne?
Question very briefly is, could you identify the banks that are involved so that people have a chance to disinvest from them?
Oh, great question. Barbara Jo and Peter is the next screen.
Excuse me for being excuse me for being ignorant, but does this pipeline go through the Quetico Superior Canoe Country? And if so, how on earth do they get away with it?
That's Ruth, you're next.
Yes. On the interview this morning on Democracy Now!, which I recommend for everybody to look at online, very powerful. It was mentioned that the South Dakota governor is planning to send National Guard troops to Line 3 resistance area. And this effort, these would be funded by a billionaire from Tennessee. Do you want to comment on that?
And Lynn Fitzhugh, you have the last question, and then we'll let Tara respond and wrap us up. Okay, go ahead, Lynn.
Hi, Tara. My question is just, can you give us the website for the Defense Fund, please?
Great final question. Okay, Tara, you've got about 7 minutes or so to answer those questions and give your final comments.
Okay. First question, for a list of the banks that are funding Line 3, please visit stopthemoneypipeline.com. It's all the baddies that you would imagine. So Citibank, Chase, Wells Fargo, US Bank, those guys. And actually one of the bigger banks that's invested specifically in Enbridge is Mizuho Bank in Japan and MUFG also in Japan, and TD Bank in Canada. But for the credit facilities that are coming up, please visit stopthemoneypipeline.com. To the second question about the Boundary Waters canoe area, Line 3 passes south of the Boundary Water canoe area. That's actually closer to where I'm actually from. I'm on the Canadian US border. It goes right through the middle of the lake, which is part of that same watershed. The big threat to pay attention to around that area is the PolyMet mine. It's a copper sulfide mine they're proposing to put right next to the Boundary Waters. Absolute madness, but part of the costs of transitioning to green economy is also one that we need to consider really thoroughly as human beings. I think there's a lot to be said for upcycling the minerals and materials that have already been ripped out of the earth, rather than ripping out more to build the solar panels and wind turbines. That's kind of a part of the conversation that never really gets discussed. The next question was, sorry, I'm trying to keep track of, there's the Boundary Waters, and then what was the next one? I can't hear you.
There was the bank, the Boundary Waters. What was the other question?
Democracy Now!
Oh, the people from Tennessee, that
Uh, Okay. Yeah, so that one, I think there's slight little change to that is they're not mobilizing them to send them here to line 3, they're mobilizing to send them to the border, as I understood it. To me, I wasn't super surprised to hear that there is an attempt to criminalize specifically land defense work all over the country. What I was surprised by was hearing that as part of it, they would be authorized to use lethal force, which to me is like I don't think it'll ever actually be able to be allowed to be enacted, like at least at this point in time. I don't think we've quite reached the state where we're willing to allow the murder of people, but in other places that is very real. Land defenders around the globe are regularly assassinated and murdered by governments, by, opposing groups, by fossil fuel industry. And we are privileged, we are privileged, but we're privileged here in the United States to face prison instead and jail time, or in this case, we're talking about misdemeanors, usually sometimes felonies, but still we're getting out of jail, right? Like we're not getting killed for this work. And the demystifying of going to jail too, for everyone that's afraid, it's really not that bad. It kind of sucks. There are worse things. For me, it's just like a chance to catch up on sleep usually. It doesn't feel good being in jail for sure, but it's certainly something that I put in balance with the world being literally on fire. And the last question was
The defense fund.
Oh, the defense fund. I can drop the link into the chat. It's protestlaw.org/line3. Line 3 is lowercase. That's who's covering the fees to pay the lawyers for water protectors arrested in the line 3 struggle. We're working on a bail fund. We're actually passing around a Venmo right now for the folks who were arrested over this last week, just because we have had some issues with finding a bail fund that's actually responsive to the front lines. It's a huge need for the campaign. And I think to wrap up my comments, I saw a question about the human rights pieces, specifically missing and murdered Indigenous women around this project. No, it was not Enbridge employees being trafficked. They were trafficking. They were busted for the second time. Actually, there's another group of employees that was busted in the fall for sex trafficking. That is an issue that to me is so avoidable and so predictable that at this point, I can't believe it's not considered as part of the assessment of whether to approve something like a line 3. I don't think that any of these expansion projects should be approved just based on the climate alone. We have already taken more fossil fuels out of the earth that if we burn them, we'd be well over 1.5 degrees. We should absolutely not be expanding fossil fuels in the face of climate crisis. And the excuse of the old line is leaking, we need to replace it. No, the old line is leaking, pull it out of the ground, clean up your mess and move on from fossil fuels. Don't keep perpetuating the industry. Don't ruin a new place. You know what I mean? Why would you build a new pipeline to leak in a new place, in a new ecosystem? That's the short-sightedness of human beings and the reality of what endless greed really looks like. The last thing I'll say is find your bravery, find your strength, find your power. Please reach out to us at GNU Collective. There are places and spaces to get involved, and yeah, just walk in a good way and walk with a clear understanding and love in your heart, and open your eyes too. It can be hard to figure out where to plug in, but if you got that drive, and you're looking to engage in land defense work, please reach out. Deeply appreciate you.
And we appreciate you, Tara. Thank you so much for being here. Let's give her some applause. Hold her in the light, send her away with our prayers. and know that we are with you in spirit. As you said, we are the earth, we are the mother, we are the stars, we are part of each other. So we are there with you in spirit. Thank you so much.